Council of the Americas, friends, members, Americas Society's friends and members. We are thrilled to be here this morning. A very warm welcome to our 2019 Council of the Americas Symposium in Miami, and to all of the Bravo honorees this evening. I'd like to thank each one of you for joining us, and especially thank our COA members, our sponsors of today's programs, and our longstanding partner, the Inter-American Development Bank, which has collaborated closely with us throughout the years. Thank you all for being here. I'd also like to give a very special thank you to the Miami team, particularly to Maria Lourdes, Mercedes Fernandez, and their entire team. But we have people here from the Washington office and the New York office, and I want to thank them as well for coming together and really making this happen today. We have strived to make this an especially relevant program given the current uncertain global business environment in a world which has become more and more unpredictable. As we've seen in recent weeks, Latin America is not immune to these constant changes, geopolitical conflicts, and weak economic growth rates. So today's program, you will hear from diverse industry leaders and their take on the skills required to navigate through the difficult landscape. We aim to offer a platform from which to engage all key actors around the theme of redefining leadership in an era of accelerated change. Because only through dialogue and exceptional leaders at all levels can we come together to explore solutions on the most pressing issues which touch all of us. Today's symposium will address how the responsible use of technology can enable economic growth, and you'll hear from the next generation of leading-edge technology challengers and top players in the financial services industry, the backbone of any economy, and its impact on financial inclusion. And I'm excited to host two prominent figures and Bravo honorees, Luis Alberto Moreno, president of the IDB, and Grammy-winning award artist Carlos Vives, who will have a conversation on the transformative power of strategic partnership in improving lives in Colombia and beyond. And today, we will also hear from two of our Bravo honorees, our women this year, and we're really excited, from Brazil and Argentina, both industry pioneers who have made their mark in two different areas, digital banking and winemaking. They broke the status quo in more ways than one. All these visionary and trailblazing leaders continue to amaze us and inspire us, and they're a source of optimism as we celebrate our landmark 25th anniversary of the Bravo Business Awards. Finally, I'd like to thank our media partners, CNN en Español and the Financial Times, who have enabled us to give new voices and space reaching millions worldwide through several platforms. And now, let's get going with the program. I would like to introduce the moderator of our next panel, Martin Reeves, Managing Director and Senior Partner and Director of BCG Henderson Institute. Thank you very much, and enjoy the program.
Thank you very much, Susan. Welcome, everybody. So we're going to kick off with a panel on leadership in a world of constant disruption, which I think is a very important topic. Just a few illustrations of the importance of the topic. A third of public companies at any time are undergoing major change because they've somehow gotten out of step with shifting technology, shifting competitive environments. We see heightened uncertainty in technology, in economies, in politics, and as very visibly as we can see from recent news, in society too, looking at the events in Chile and Brexit and Hong Kong and so on. Disruption, probably in strategy, the word of the decade is disruption, and our analysis suggests that only a third of incumbents actually survive and thrive under disruption, so a really difficult challenge. And we have a lot of big companies represented today on the panel. It used to be that scale was an advantage, and scale was a sort of buffer against uncertainty and volatility. Well, scale is becoming a source of inertia against change, so there are challenges for incumbents in adjusting to this. And we move from a time of efficiency and scale where we need to emphasize more flexibility, resilience, adaptation, and organizations really need to fundamentally change to address those challenges. And we've got a panel that hardly needs any introduction in this part of the world today, so let me be brief in my introduction to discuss this topic. So we have Assis, the General Manager of IBM in Latin America, who I'm sure will have a lot to say about technology and organization. We have André El-Mann, the CEO of Fibra 30 years experience in real estate and various other sectors. Andrés Gluski, the CEO of the AES Corporation, has worked across a lot of different sectors and is a very renowned leader in business in general in Latin America. We have Gerardo Mato, the chairman of global banking and markets for the Americas at HSBC. So a really terrific panel to discuss this question. And João Miranda, of course, not to forget João at the end there, who is the CEO of Votorantim. Of course, with their diverse interests, I'm sure he will have a lot to say about the question. So let's launch into the first question. In the short term, we see instability and volatility, but of course, there is also secular change. We probably need to compete in different ways to win in the next decade. Could I ask you, what do you think it will take for companies to win competitively in the next decade? What shapes are you seeing through the fog of uncertainty? Maybe start with you, Anna.
So good morning, everybody. We cannot deny the fact that technology is certainly one of the major sources of disruption and changes that we are seeing in the market right now. But I would argue that technology alone is not the only responsible for that. And more, what we are seeing is the need to adapt people, to create skills, readapt skills in reality to deal with all this change. So when I think about what's the primary aspect that companies will have to focus on, I would say is really how they will transform the workforce to be adapted to this new reality.
Thank you. Andrés, how are you thinking about winning in the coming decade?
What I think is happening is there's a real change, say, in technology in my sector, which is the energy sector. So we have to go from just being sort of providers of infrastructure to providers of solutions. So technology is an important component of that. But really it's, understanding your clients and understanding their changing needs and then really seeing how those technologies you can solve what they need. So I think the knowledge of the clients and, as Paula says, Ana Paula says, is really, you have to have the right skills in your workforce. So it's really reskilling your workforce as you make these changes. But in many respects, it's a very exciting time. And I think work will, in many ways, get better and more interesting as technology assists people in their work.
I mean, as the Chinese and the Japanese say, the word for crisis also means the word opportunity. Thinking about the next decade in banking, Gerardo, what is the opportunity? What do you need to think differently in order to win in the coming decade?
If I will summarize, probably I will go to 4 or 5 focus points. And it's not only technology. I think it's, Ana Paula was saying this before, I think you have the diversity. That's something that actually we're very focused on. I think brainstorming with different people from different regions that thinks out of the box, actually bring new ideas, that's key. Then you have to embrace new learning constantly in technology. And if you look today, the Gen Z, the Generation Z has no time for how to use technology. So they are actually pushing, there is no time, they're pushing for us to actually innovate constantly. So then you have also to embrace to building the new frontier, which is all the sustainability and use of technology to continue supporting as we're doing right now as a top underwriting of green bonds and sustainability financing. Just to put in perspective, if you think if by the 2030, the commitment in order for temperature not to continue rising is around $6 to $8 trillion, and today commitment has not surpassed $1 trillion. And you need, for example, but it's growing very fast. I mean, the forecast of issuing green bonds for this year was around 120 billion, and I believe by the end of 2019 we will be around 240 billion in issuance. And the other thing that is for me very important is to continue building relationships, because we talk a lot about technology. Technology is wonderful, but look at this auditorium. I mean, despite of the iPads and the iPhones and the technology, still a people business, and I don't think that will change. So we have to actually converge technology with relationships, and that's a way I think you can build a future.
Thank you, Gerardo. André, how are you thinking about winning in the next decade? How are you thinking differently about strategy and organization?
Actually, in our line of business in the real estate, I think is one of the key points where the new digital era is meeting the brick and mortar era, the real, actual space where people meet, where people go and buy and purchase their needs. We need to find a way to live with this new technology and try to get advantage for our tenants. I mean, the big data, for example, is one very powerful tool for the businesses that are actually established to bring more services to their clients. But we will need to find a way to facilitate our tenants to live with this new technology in order to give their clients the facilities that the new digital era will bring to the table.
João, the company league tables, of course, 10 years ago bear no resemblance to today. You know, the winners of a decade ago are completely different from those today, and it looks like they're going to be as different again in 10 years' time. What's it going to take to be on that list in terms of competing and organizing differently?
Well, thank you. Good morning, everyone, and thank you very much for the opportunity of being here. Definitely, you have to really go away from the day-to-day affairs to try and come up with a good answer to that. And the way we look at it is that when you look at, for instance, what technology is doing and disrupting incumbent businesses, remember we are in several base industries. Votorantim is in several base industries and has been in business for 100 years. And we've always transformed ourselves, but not in a way that we should at this point, which is the speed in which technology makes you look at how to reinvent yourself every day is enormous. So I think the capacity to reinvent yourself every day at a far faster pace is what will make it to the survival kit. Yes?
Sorry, I wanted to ask you a follow-up on that, which is, if you look back at business books going back 30, 40, 50 years even, the first chapter always says the world is more complex, more faster moving than ever, and we need to change. But it sounds like we're saying that the extent of change is even greater than before. Is that?
Absolutely.
Do you see that in your business?
Absolutely, and I think one of the aspects that not only what sometimes we strive with insurgent companies is that they're absolutely and overly technology enabled, but that's not it. The main thing that they seem to be doing well is to be effectively customer driven in a way that we think we are, but we're not. Again, going back to the initial question, not only you have to reinvent yourself, but you have to be a lot more imaginative. Mm-hmm. Put yourself in the shoes of your clients and absolutely look at what's the pain, what's the real problem that you have to address. More often than not, we call ourselves customer-centric, but what we're trying to do is to make sure the clients like us the way we are better.
Yes, indeed.
Okay, so I think that's most of the change that we'll see, and that will require a diverse base of talent. So attracting the talents, embracing technology, and really, really, looking at clients and their pains, not the way they can buy more of the products you have today.
So that's a pretty amazing change agenda we're laying out there, right? We're hearing embrace technology, change organization, be customer-centric, understand customer pain points, adapt to changing social conditions, change our business model. We know that it's not that easy to change large corporations. So you're sitting there at the control panel of your large enterprises. How well set up do you think you are for that change, and where do you start? If you had to say, like, there are 3, 4, 5 things that we absolutely have to change, what would they be? So maybe you can go down the line in the reverse direction. Joe, what has to change in the typical incumbent, the large successful corporation to get to the future?
Okay, well, I think first, as we heard this very morning, for you to change, you don't have to send a lot of people to Palo Alto, I think, right? So it has to come from within. And if I may, I would use an example. In the cement business in Brazil, different from here, cement in Brazil sells mostly in bags, and it's, self-construction is very important. So you get to have a lot of contact with a lot of people. And of course, there's a very diverse market, a very organized market of civil construction, but also a very diverse array of people who build their own houses, etc. Votorantim Cimento has a lot of capillarity into this these small retailers, and we started. Of course, first you start developing a digital relationship with them. You start collecting more data, being smarter. You start looking at climate and ways in which you can use better logarithms and help them manage their stock. But that's never enough, because the next guy can do the same. So we came up with a loyalty program, which was meant to, give in volumes, give those retailers points, and those points would convert into training, into more knowledge, so that they could add a service to their clients, and that would foster their sales, and therefore our sales as well. So, and from that, we used to have that, and all of a sudden we realized that from that to marketplace, we had to add other, top brands. So we called Gerardo for long steel and other players, big brands, and also building materials to join us in this loyalty program, which will soon enough become a marketplace. Right. So that's the kind of thing that we have to look at, something which is very traditional, looked at as a commodity, but in the end, there's a whole host of things that you can do.
So I'm hearing a couple of themes that were, you're amplifying a couple of themes we heard this morning from Professor Gupta in a way. One of them is, I think, reinventing the business from the customer backwards. We may think we're customer-oriented, but are we really? And I'm hearing a theme of, at the end of your comments there, about ecosystems. Maybe the boundary of the organization is not the boundary of the legal entity. But same question to you, André. What needs to be reinvented in the typical large company? What are the main pain points within the company to reach the future?
I think that what Mr. Gupta said in the morning is very true. You need to put yourself in your customer's shoes. Mm-hmm. Now, this works either before or after, and let me expand on that. For a tenant of ours in a warehouse, you need to work on the design and the engineering of a better space in order for them to deliver faster and more efficient their goods. This is before. For a retail tenant of ours, is after you sign the contract. You need to provide them with the traffic, with the foot traffic enough for them to do business. In the old days, a company like ours was done when we signed a contract. I mean, the counterparty is obliged to pay the rent no matter what. But now, we need to be aware that our tenant may do business in order for them to be sustainable, and if they are sustainable, ergo we are sustainable.
So we might describe it as a sort of economic empathy, if you like. It's not just a case of selling stuff to the customer. It's a case of understanding their business and adding value to their businesses so that they want to be a member of your club, your ecosystem.
I need to provide the conditions for them.
Yeah, which is quite different, right?
Yeah, quite different from what it used to be.
Is it the same story in banking, Gerardo, or what would you say as the key
that,
pain points? in your business model?
Technology is just a tool. So it's not that we need to invest in technology. We need to understand, and I agree with what Andrew was saying and Joao was saying. I mean, the main focus is client needs, and client needs are different in different regions, are different in different products. So we need to invest in the right technology, but for that, we need to understand the client needs. But I repeat, there is no time for the millennium from the GNC. Someone said the other day something interesting. They said, when I was young, my teachers were old. Now that I'm old, my teachers are young. Mm-hmm. So we actually need to open space for these guys to grow and to come with the out-of-the-box idea, because that is how we're going to win the next decade.
Mm-hmm. So it's a very wise comment. Some of the companies I work with have given their senior executives, 23-year-old coaches that actually understand the technology and the changing social norms. Do you do something similar on that front?
Just the other day, I was with a company, a tech company, I'm not going to give the name, but very recognized, and they mentioned that a huge company in Palo Alto, and they said they were actually doing around 40 acquisitions a year, of an average between $300 and $500 million. So I asked them, how old are the innovators or the creators of these companies? Say an average between 25 and 28. Mm-hmm. And we try to keep them inside the company to continue developing the products, and we have given them all the sources. So the youngsters today are actually showing us a way.
Yeah, I think you may be right. I mean, we just did a big analysis for Fortune magazine of vitality of companies, and we actually found that the vitality of companies, their potential for growth, was actually related to the youthfulness of their senior management and the turnover in the senior management. So maybe a serious point. Andrés, what doesn't work in the big company business model that particularly needs changing from a leadership perspective to get to the future?
Well, I think one of the questions is really, how does incumbency help you? Mm-hmm. Right? That's what we're talking about. So incumbency can be helpful. It gives you scale, it gives you experience, and you have a brand. You know how to operate, let's say, in a certain space. What does it bring bad? And I think, just give an example, maybe like Kodak. Kodak was the inventor of the digital camera, but they never implemented it because they were making so much money on film. So they got disrupted by other people. So I think that's one of the problems with an incumbent, is that you have certain businesses that today are doing very well, and you have a new idea coming. Are you willing to disrupt today's business for a promise of tomorrow? Mm-hmm. So I think incumbents can do well, bringing in, sort of startups and actually give them scale. So for example, at AES, we have bought a number of small companies in new technologies and really accelerated their growth. For example, cloud-based energy efficiency products and services. It grew much faster once it became part of us. Distributed energy. Energy storage, all these things grew much faster under us. But the incumbent has to have the humility to say, look, you have to have a light touch. You can't treat it the same as a massive organization, something like a distribution company, because you'll kill it.
Is there a bottleneck? There are these advantages of you have a lot of customers, you have probably financial stability and cash flow, sure. You have data potentially, but it's not so easy to unlock those advantages. What's the critical rate-limiting step there, do you think, as for an incumbent?
Again, I think the key is to a certain humility in terms like you're not going to get these new companies and make them exactly the way you are. On the other hand, to really recognize where the advantages are. And you also need, quite frankly, these young companies that see an advantage in you. Mm-hmm. So fortunately, in our case, it wasn't like it was a mutual attraction. It wasn't that we went out and made sort of a hostile bid on them. So it's worked out very well. But I think the reason we've been successful in that is really kind of both sides figuring out where the advantages of coming together.
Thank you. Anna, IBM has been very public about its struggles and philosophy and aspiration to reinvent itself again. Of course, It's a company that's reinvented itself several times in its history.
Many times.
As we look towards the next decade, what's the formula for that reinvention, either for yourself or for your customers?
Yeah, let me just go back a little bit on the topic of incumbency, because I do believe there is a new wave of disruption coming up, and it's going to be led by this tradition of incumbent companies. So Andrés and I, a couple of days ago, we were in an event in New York IBM every 2 years hosts the 100 CEOs from around the world. And most of these CEOs are from the traditional companies, right? And this time we had the benefit of doing some analysis. We fed the interviews that we made with those CEOs to Watson and asked a few questions to Watson. So I'd like to share some of these statistics because I think it can benefit a lot of you. So the CEOs were 3 times less doubtful than they were in 2017 about their digital transformation strategy. They had 40% a more systematic approach towards it than they had before. So they're much more clear on what are the things that they need to do. Where are they dwelling with? 75% of them said they are struggling with the workforce, right? How they're going to change the skills that they have today in order to cope with all this transformation. And then when we think about the 4 items that were common and we kind of created a framework around how do you transform yourself into a new company, we thought about rediscovering your core. So let's think about a rental car company. Are you a rental car company or a fleet management company, right? So what are the types of services that you can do on top of what you provide as a product in order to better satisfy your client? I heard a quote the other day that I found fantastic, right? Every product is a service waiting to happen, right? The second aspect is exactly that. You have to shift from products to experience. Clients want to have every day a better experience than they had yesterday. And that can only be done with a combination of product and services. Finally, we have to move from just experimentation to scaling. I heard another fantastic quote where they said, we are living in a pilot purgatory, right? I mean, we do small things, we try, but we don't have the ability to make them scale and have a pervasive impact on the company. So how do you bring everybody on board and don't create those specific initiatives that are going to work perfectly fine for that particular group, but doesn't change the entire ship, as Sunil was talking about this morning.
Could I ask you to double click on that last element? Because indeed, one of the hard things is not to have an opinion about what to do, not to run the pilot, but to take resources away from a historically successful business and scale a business that may not yet be profitable and may be riddled with uncertainty. I mean, the NPV calculation for the new thing, almost always looks worse at the beginning. So, and I know that your CEO said a lot about that, that scaling problem. Yeah. So what's the art of doing that right? Of scaling the growth opportunities?
The right of doing that right is being bold about the initiatives that you decide to go after. So, for example, when we decided to create the Watson division at IBM, we created a 1 billion division where we pulled in resources from multiple parts of the business, and we pretty much created a startup of $1 billion of investment in order to create the capabilities to develop this new solution, this new offering that we are going to the market with. So I think being bold about the things you want to do, being ready to and acknowledge the fact that you may have mistakes on the way, learn from them and adapt to them very quickly, adjust very quickly. But I think that the assurance that you're taking the right decisions and make significant investments to make sure that they actually are fruitful, I think it's really one of the key elements to it. And one final aspect I think I would like to add is the fact that more and more we are living in a world of and, right? I mean, it's not do this or this, but you do this and this. So you have to make profit, but you also have to contribute to the society, right? So more and more, I think that if we consider these 4 aspects, those are the elements that are helping companies to progress.
So let's come to the core question. We've spoken about the challenges, the disruptions. We've spoken about what needs to be done. And of course, leadership is the lever to get it done, the how. So some people would say that, look, leadership is the basics of leadership are perennial. There's basically nothing new about this situation. Other people say it's fundamentally new. We're leading ecosystems. We're leading not just people, but synergistic combinations of people and algorithms. So does the formula for leadership have to change in some way to get to the future. Anna?
Yeah, absolutely.
How does it need to change?
Yeah, many aspects. The first one is we always think of the leader as the person that knows everything. That's completely far from the truth today. You need leaders that acknowledge that they don't know, that ask more questions than say that they know about things. We need leaders that are empathetic. We need leaders that are able to create groups that work effectively together. Collaboration is a big element to this equation. We need leaders that are humble, right? So I think the leadership capabilities and characteristics have completely changed in this new day and age. And for me, that's probably one of the major reasons or challenges that companies are facing, because if you continue with your traditional leadership style, it's impossible that you're going to be able to drive this entire transformation.
Andrés, how would you say the formula for leadership needs to change? As you look at raising the next generation of leaders, are you basically looking for the perennials, or are you looking for different things to cope with the next 10 years?
First, I think there's always been different leadership skills needed for different situations. So for example, if you have to turn around a company that's nearing bankruptcy, you really do need somebody who may be, sort of a bull in a china closet. If on the other hand, you're inventing something new, attracting new talent, the last thing you want is a bull in a china closet. So I think, different leadership skills are needed depending on the situation of the company. Now, I do think things have changed in terms of, the more skilled workforce that we have today will demand leadership, much like Ana Paula said, more empathetic, more open, less of the sort of know-it-all, less of a directional leadership and more of a collaborative leadership. So I think that's the changes that we're seeing. I do think that the key today, more than ever, is you have to be willing to continually learn, because the skill set, the market, things are changing. So that, I would say, is a key element, that you have to be more willing to learn, perhaps, than you were in the past. But I don't think there's just like, one style, fits all. Given there's some general characteristics, you have to see what's the situation of the company at that time.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Gerardo, what would be your reflections on the different leadership attributes that we might need for the next decade?
I think to be a good leader, and they basically cover all the grounds, but also you need a little bit of responsibility in the way you act, in the sense that you need to completely think out of the box, and you don't need to go back and see how it was done before. You have to say, well, how I adapt myself and move forward. And for that reason, what you need to do is constantly being educated. And I think you have to be a great listener, someone that listen from the top to the last employee, not to be surrounded by the same old people all the time and get second-hand information. I think it's good to be connected with not to lose the connection. In the case of the banking, not to lose the connection with the clients and with the key people in the organization. Mm-hmm. So I think you have to, as Ana Paula was saying, collaboration is a huge an important aspect of being a good leader.
Thank you. Let me change gear and come to the sort of, in a way, the elephant on the table. We look at the TV and we see some very disturbing sort of social disruptions on many fronts, right? We see the extinction movement and Hong Kong falling apart very quickly, and now Chile, and I struggle as a Brit to understand what's going on with Brexit. It just doesn't make sense from an economic perspective. So this sort of social and political and ecological dimension seems more important than ever. André, what would be your perspective on that dimension of leadership? Do we need to sort of change how we factor that into business?
I think that we are lacking true hombres de Estado. In Spanish is state leaders, statesmen in the world. There's a lot of problems in all the world. I was talking to Jerry earlier that Latin America is on fire, but literally on fire. Mm-hmm. So I think that the true leaders need to think more about people. I think it's a process we are living. The road to democracy and development is a long and difficult road. And our countries, I think Latin America in general, are going through that path, and it hurts a little. But I think in the future, as long as the developments starts kicking in our countries.
So the word, I think did you use the word statesmanship essentially just there? Mm-hmm. Leaders as statesmen.
Yeah, statesmen.
Yeah. So, I mean, that's a tricky one, isn't it? Because on the one hand, you know, in many countries right now, we can't necessarily rely on polarized politics, fearful politics to get the big problems like global warming fixed. On the other hand, you know, is that what your shareholders are paying you for? You know, it's a strange sort of conflict of interest perhaps for a leader to also to be a social statesman. But your opinion is that leaders need to be statesmen?
Yes, of course.
Yeah.
True statesmen.
And what is, could you give us a couple of bullet points in terms of like, what is that statesmanship agenda? You know, as companies step up to those social challenges, what are the key elements of making that happen?
You know, politics are difficult to describe, but I think that true statesmen, you can name a few in the history, and need to take care of their people.
Mm-hmm. And are you thinking about statesmanship in terms of, maybe Joe, if I can ask you, would you agree that leaders need to become statesmen and engage with these social issues, or should they focus on the knitting and leave those things to politicians?
Look, I don't know as to whether we would come to a point of becoming statesmen, but definitely should engage. I think what's going on right now is that we live in a world where expectations are completely unanchored, okay? And that's leading to, you know, events such as the ones you mentioned in Chile, Hong Kong. Politicians just don't get it. And maybe entrepreneurs and business leaders also don't. I think more and more we have to look at what we do today with the view of how we will continue to do that for future generations. So energy, energy efficiency and usage, natural resources usage, climate change, all of that are part of the risks and therefore the opportunities we face as business leaders. Mm-hmm. And that's a calling from society. So if we're not able to anticipate those changes in consumer, in consumer patterns and behavior from that line of thinking, then you're going to be out of business soon enough. Right. Now, what's the role? I do think that thinking about those things and doing something about it is what we're paid for today. You know, you have to create value, and how you share that value is as important as how you create that value. And we're going to be measured by that. Actually, we are already. So, again, that's my definition of, yes, a corporate...
That's part of the job.
A corporation is a citizen, as an individual is, and has a role to play in it, in society.
So we've generated a lot of themes today. We're not going to resolve them on this panel, but perhaps we've set an agenda of some sort for the conference. I just want to wrap up by asking you, imagine one of your young fast-track leaders comes to you and says, what's the one thing I really need to focus on? What's your most critical piece of advice? Or whether we could have some single bullet point pieces of advice on the most important thing, perhaps a counterintuitive thing that the next generation of leaders should focus on. What would be your one thing, Anna?
Responsibility. I think we are in a world where people are demanding more and more from companies, that they really play a pivotal role in how they do their work, how they do their business, but what impact they are creating on the planet. So I think responsibility.
Yeah. Andrés, what will be yours?
I would say, very frankly, it's sort of a balanced approach, because I think that we have to be careful about the shiny new object.
Yes.
If it's not broke it type thing. So I really think that this technology is an enabler of many things. Mm-hmm. But you have, I think, to have a balanced approach, take into account all stakeholders, your employees, your shareholders, society, your consumers, et cetera. So I would say that try to be well-rounded.
Less efficiency and technology monomania and more balance.
Well, you can have that, but I think there's a real problem if we get too attracted to the shiny new objects,
right,
and forget about everything else.
Right. What will be your one piece of advice, Gerardo?
Yeah, I would say constantly educate yourself. Attitude is a great component of being a leader, and actually be responsible and always use your common sense.
Okay. André?
I agree with Ana Paula that responsibility is one thing we need to teach youngsters, and for them to see, never lose sight of what happened before.
Okay.
Where do they come from?
João, what's the one thing?
Plain and simple, be true to yourself and never stop learning.
Well, I think we're out of time. Let's thank our panelists for this really interesting discussion.